Merci Jacques. Si vous me permettez, je ferai mes remarques en anglais. Lionel, that was a fascinating kickoff for our conversation, and I fully agree that global governance is complicated. If you take a different approach, you end up seeing things that you have not been seeing for a long time. I think this is a very healthy approach. I will try to build on your statements and put some further arguments on the table to suggest that there are ways to deal with this complicated situation we're in, and I'll come to the short-term challenges at the end. Bottom line of my point is the following. One of the new policy dimensions that has taken up a lot of attention in the G20 and elsewhere is the role that structural policies, in a broad sense, can play in international coordination. Structural policies used to be considered mostly, if not exclusively, national domain. This is still true to a large extent. The point is that structural policies have very important spillover effects on the international sphere, and therefore not only those spillovers and externalities have to be taken into consideration, but they can be turned around, and structural policies can become useful additional tools. If that is the case, there is one implication for possible future agendas of the next G20s, which can be stated as follows. There is scope for synergies between progress that the framework for strong and sustainable and balanced growth will make and discourse on the reform of the international monetary system. And now I'll try to argue very briefly that if you bring structural reforms into the picture, that link can come out more clearly with opportunities. How would you describe the desirable features of a good international monetary system? Well, there are lots of them, but I came out with three very simple ones. One, an international monetary system should be flexible, so to allow adjustment takes place not too late, meaning that it copes with the mounting of unsustainable imbalances. One of the lessons I think we have learned from the crisis is that we have not seen them coming. It's not a question of exogenous shocks. It's a question of imbalances that have been building up for some time, and suddenly they have exploded for some even casual reason. So you would like to have a system that avoids that building up. The second point is an old, time-honored issue of international monetary system, asymmetry. You would like to see the adjustment borne, if not equally, at least less unequally between surplus and deficit countries. And pressures for surplus countries to adjust, as we all know, are not that strong. Third point, this should not come at the expense of growth. You would like to have an international monetary system that delivers sustainable growth, even though I take very much Lionel's point, in some cases that might be excessive. So how can structural reforms contribute to that? Very quickly, I'd like to share with you some examples that are coming out, if you allow me, from OECD research, and which are also used as inputs to the G20 exercise. Of course, we all know that structural reforms, including labor market, product market, financial market, innovation-related structural reforms, are good for growth. They enhance potential output. But there is increasing evidence that they also do other things. One thing I will not talk about is that they can be beneficial for fiscal adjustment. The other thing instead that I want to talk about is that they can be beneficial for global external imbalances. One obvious way is that if you increase, say, flexibility in labor markets and you have wages adjust more rapidly to productivity changes, then that adjusts external imbalances. One lesson in Europe we should take more seriously than we have done so far. Another way, which is perhaps more interesting in this context, is that in countries where high structural savings or structurally low investment persist, structural reforms can address saving and investment in a way that eventually reverberates in current account imbalances. And there are several examples there. In surplus countries, for instance, think of emerging economies with high savings. If you improve social security systems, pensions, health, this would address household savings, which are clearly very high. Financial market liberalization in those countries would address corporate savings, which are also very high. Liberalizing product markets could increase investment in some of those countries. In deficit countries, in addition to flexibility, you could think of productivity-enhancing measures that would increase savings. In surplus countries in advanced economies, and I'm thinking about one large economy member of the Eurozone, which is north of Italy, there, liberalization of, say, the service sector, which is not France, liberalization of the service sector, for instance, would definitely increase a stubbornly low investment rate in that country, and therefore you would have a rebalancing of the structural determinants of the current account surplus of that country without necessarily doing one thing that that country's government has said they don't want to do, which is fiscal expansion, especially now. So there are several examples, but if we accept that point, then what I really want to talk about is what are the implications for bringing this dimension into international monetary system reform. Well, first of all, of course, I'm not claiming that by addressing saving and investment in their structural determinants, you have solved the problems of adjustment at the international level. What I'm saying much more modestly is that if you add structural reforms to the toolkit of policy instruments that you can put in place to address global imbalances, then there is a strengthening of the package. And this, again, as I read it, is the spirit of the framework of the G20 framework for growth. Second point is the time dimension. What can we do tomorrow? Well, if I may say so, tomorrow we can start doing things that will bring sustainable results over the medium term. But at least we move in the right direction. Now, structural reforms, of course, take a long time, a few years, to produce impacts on growth and address those macroeconomic variables. But if that is the case, and if those reforms go in the right direction, then other reforms, such as reforming the exchange rate system in some countries, then is reinforced by the fact that this takes place in a situation in which fundamentals are going in the right direction. So that reinforces other instruments and brings back into the debate an old policy debate, which I'm old enough to recollect, which is the sequencing of reforms. When we ask countries to reform in different ways, do we ask when and with what order should we do it? No, we don't. This, I think, is a big economic mistake. It can be even a larger political mistake because it does not give those countries we are asking to reform the appropriate political timeline. And the sequencing of reform is important also for that reason. Structural reforms that address surplus countries' needs provide one, although partial, solution to the issue of asymmetry. Stan Fisher, a few days back, last week, at the seminar in Washington, said, well, for 60 years we have tried to address the symmetry problem in adjustment. We have not solved it, and it's still there. Pressure on surplus countries to adjust is very, very small. So the issue is, can those countries be offered a larger menu of options that do not go against their immediate policy preferences, that eventually make them, for them, desirable to take those policy actions that eventually lead to a reduction of the surplus? This might be one case. Second set of points, very quickly, relates even more closely to what Lionel was saying. Current account imbalances, global imbalances, underlying saving investment imbalances should not be eliminated totally. They are good in some cases. There is a very recent nice paper by Blanchard and Cottarelli on that. There are some good imbalances that are good because their determinants reflect the right choices in investment that would lead to a larger tradable sector that would address fundamental problems. So one question that I put on the table, can we try to understand better the linkage between structural reforms that address different incentives for investment, both in the real sector and the financial sector in some countries, and the implications for international capital flows? What kind of international monetary system from that point of view would we like to see? Well, very simply, I'd say I would like to see a system where there is more long-term investment and less volatile investment Just give me a direction. I'm not asking for figures. So would those reforms help? I say they would, but of course this is where people much more expert than I am come in. But this, again, would be another point. I'm coming to the conclusion. So my point is that there is scope for the agenda on international economic governance to be converging, putting together the elements which are underlying the framework issues, which is rebalancing in the medium to long term, but also in the short term, and the instruments that you need to put in place to have a better international monetary system. Let's put aside the issue of reserve currencies, which it's a very delicate one. Let's more modestly look at the issue of itself very important of financial safety nets. If the fundamental adjustment through help of structural reforms go in the right directions, then the way you think about financial safety nets could itself be changed. There would be perhaps more preference for multilateral and regional solutions to financial safety nets, less so to national solutions to financial safety nets, which of course take the form of excessive reserve accumulation. So there is another synergy. Last and not least, the international monetary system, whatever that means in the future, would itself benefit from more explicit attention to structural reforms from a collective point of view, because it would give directions to long-term investment choices. Maybe I'm wrong. So this is what I wanted to say. One final line on the current situation. Let me just say one obvious thing, that I said more flexibility. Now, let's not confuse flexibility with instability. Instability may be extremely detrimental. Many have raised that point. More flexibility is needed. It would be complement and would be reinforced by structural reform policies. The concerns about the current state of monetary tensions, Lionel mentioned them, and it's very interesting the perspective he offers. Let me just add one point, which is a source of concern. Tensions are bad economically because they invite retaliation. There can even be worse politically because they signal that countries' preferences are moving away from a very difficult medium-term cooperative perspective towards a shortcut, short-term solution, which, to me, does not lead very far. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup pour cette introduction de la question des réformes structurelles dans les débats sur la conduite des politiques macroéconomiques en période de sortie de crise et de réforme du système monétaire international. Évidemment, une question institutionnelle intéressante à poser dans la discussion, ça sera de savoir quel rôle l'OCDE, qui est experte en matière de réforme structurelle, pourrait être appelée à jouer si on poursuit l'idée qui vient d'être introduite.